Welcome to the On the Pen, the Weekly Dose podcast, your one-stop shop for obesity medicine news with your host, man on the pen, Dave Knapp. Welcome to this Tuesday, April 29th edition of On the Pen, the Weekly Dose podcast. I'm your host, Dave Knapp, man on the Manjaro. That's why I'm here. You are on the pen. Wegovy, Saxenda, Victoza, Trulicity, Manjaro, Zepbound, Compound, that pen. That's what we talk about each and every week. We've got a great show, just a huge stack of stuff to get through this week. Such a big week in obesity medicine news, such a big week in On the Pen news. And I want to start right here with you all and just thank you for the opportunity to advocate for you this past week in Washington, D.C. What a joy that was. If you haven't caught some of the content that we did around the advocacy trip there, we had a wonderful time sitting in on a roundtable discussion that we were invited to combat obesity, misinformation, and bias. Great conversation with some really influential thought leaders in the world of obesity medicine. I found myself very humbled to be in the company of some really great minds and just to participate in some dialogue and represent you, the patients. I mentioned at the outset of this year, if you go back to the early podcast from this year, we talked so much about how I saw this forming into some really great opportunities for advocacy this year. And so far, it has not disappointed. So I thank the Obesity Action Coalition for the invite to be able to bring the patient perspective to that conversation. I think that it's hugely valuable and important for the patients' voices to be heard in those rooms. And I am just grateful for the opportunity to have shared some of that. So go back and check out some of the content on YouTube and TikTok over the last couple days if you want to catch up on that. Got to hang out with my friend Mike on a Mission. If y'all don't know Mike Donnelly Boylan, he's at Mike on a Mission over on TikTok. A great guy, great content creator in the world of GLP-1. He's like the GLP-1 nice guy. He is the one who is always welcoming new people into the community. He's so good and such a nice guy. And it's always really like heartwarming when that plays out in real life. You don't always know when you meet people how that's going to play out and how that's going to translate. And Mike is such a good dude. So Mike and I got the chance. I had some meetings set up over on Capitol Hill with some Senate offices, and I invited Mike along because Mike lives in that world. He's in the sort of the legal world and just really tuned into politics and those things. So it was a wonderful time to have Mike there and helping to advocate and helping me navigate, those conversations and just the lay of the land in Washington, D.C. in general. One of my biggest takeaways, and I've got this on my Substack, so if you are not on Substack, I can't recommend Substack enough, but we started a Substack this past weekend. If you're not familiar with it, it's just a way to, it's a social media platform that allows creators to basically post articles, and those articles then get delivered to you directly to your inbox. There's actually a paid subscription on there, so you can actually give back to the OTP community. If you find our information valuable, there's going to be some members only content. We dropped some this weekend as well. But just a great platform to engage with content, and especially OTP content now. But we dropped it in our Substack, just was kind of telling everyone it was a really sacred and sort of profound moment for me personally to be in Washington, D.C. as somebody who's grown up with a fascination about government, politics, and how all of that works. To be standing on basically the front lawn of the White House, very close to the White House, and to hear protesters yelling in the distance, and to hear well-wishers for the president as well as adversaries of the president, and just to hear people exercising their freedom of speech was a very, very profound moment for me. I found it very beautiful. I was actually moved to tears in that moment and just found myself full of gratitude to be able to be there advocating for the accessibility of obesity medicine. And that's exactly what we got the chance to do. And I guarantee you there will be more of that. We had some great conversations with Senator Cassidy's office, with some liaisons from the HELP committee. You may be familiar with the HELP committee that actually brought up the CEO of Novo Nordisk last year. Last year, the chairman of the help committee was Bernie Sanders. He's now I believe the ranking member, and the chairman is Senator Cassidy from Louisiana, who opened their doors to us and let us sort of just preach the gospel about accessibility and what mechanisms we believe are in play right now to help bring down the cost of these medications in the near term. Of course, we met with Senator Fetterman's office. We also stopped in to a couple different offices as well, and just said hello and introduced ourselves. But it was a great conversation all around. I got to say, I left the week or the couple days that we were there feeling very confident that price declines for branded medications, especially, are on the horizon. I feel better about the cost accessibility of branded medications today than I did 2 weeks ago. And I felt better 2 weeks ago than I did 2 months prior to. And so I feel better the more I learn and the more I plugged in that help is on the way, and that we will see some meaningful cost reductions in these medications. And so I'm hopeful that our voice lended some color, and really we were there to also offer ourselves as a resource. On the Pen as a resource, a patient advocacy resource, and so I was just elated to be able to do that. So I don't want to spend much time more time on that, but I can't encourage you enough to go on over and join our Substack. Please do that. I'll add that to the show notes of the video. Lots more to get to, though, because there was a ton of news, and I kind of want to start the rest of the podcast talking about what we learned yesterday from a PubMed publication. Now, if you're not familiar, PubMed is a journal that publishes studies and data on medicine, and this was a really interesting article that dropped yesterday. I don't know if article is not the right word, but let's say study. It was a retrospective study, meaning it's one of those studies where they compound data from the real world use of medications. And so basically this information was getting passed around yesterday as proof that GLP-1 medications are unsafe, and fear travels extremely fast, but context moves slower, and we want to bring you some context around this study. So it was basically a study that was done by a really an organization that I am actually keenly familiar with. This is a organization called Partnership for Safe Medications. I've had conversations with them in the past because they have really been on the front lines of identifying and eradicating fake drugs in our supply chain. Now, we covered a few weeks ago how there was fake Ozempic discovered in Arkansas pharmacies, and I'm talking the Ozempic pens, but the substance in those pens was of unknown origin, and the markings on the boxes were not legitimate, and this made its way into our supply chain. Identifying that and getting to the bottom of that doesn't happen without the good work of places like the Partnership for Safe Medications. So I know that it's coming from a good organization, but there are some things that I just wanted to flag about this study. So like I said, the study was published in PubMed, and it's available over on our Substack. You can look at the article that we wrote, and you can also look at the PubMed publication as well. But it was looking at compounded versions of semaglutide, tirzepatide, and liraglutide. And the researchers basically looked at about 700 reports in the FAERS database. It's basically a government reporting tool where doctors can go and patients can go report side effects from medications. Now, there are over 80,000 reports in the FAERS database on GLP-1s. They were able to pull out 700 that they felt represented a small sample of compounded drugs, compounded versions of GLP-1s. And the data that they came up with was serious. It was cause for concern. So I want to acknowledge that the information that they came out with, which was a higher risk of over or underdosing, a higher risk of hospitalizations, believe it or not, these are serious. But there's context that is super important to help patients, which is what we do, to give you more competent and confident conversations with your doctors, because your doctors may just see the headline of this article and that's all they see. We want to provide you with the information that helps you to have more confident and competent conversations. So this study is already being weaponized by different, let's say, industry voices. And it tells you as much about the ecosystem that patients are operating in. We're sort of trapped in this place where we're left to fend for the data ourselves and to sort of parse through this ourselves, and that's why we exist. So despite a lot of the noise online, this study was not funded by Novo Nordisk. It wasn't funded by Eli Lilly or really any pharmaceutical company directly. The authors, which I mentioned that are associated with the Partnership for Safe Medicine, say that they funded it through their own institution. Now, that organization undoubtedly receives a portion of its funding from pharmaceutical companies. It's an important factor to consider when taking this data in. But even so, this particular study was not directly sponsored by pharma. And I think that's an important distinction to make, because there are people out there saying this was funded by Novo. No, it actually wasn't. It was funded by the Partnership for Safe Medicines, as I told you earlier, who are doing, they've got our back when it comes to, identifying where some holes in our supply chains for our medications and ensuring that we can trust the medications we get when we go to the pharmacy. So I don't think that funding relationships automatically discredit important works. In groups like the Partnership for Safe Medicines, which is a nonprofit, have played a critical role in our safety of medicines in this country. So the way the study presents its finding leaves one massive gap that we take a massive issue with, and that is this one in particular. It does not differentiate in the final data whether a medication came from a 503B outsourcing facility, whether the medication came from a 503A compounding pharmacy, or whether it was just plum gray market research grade peptides. There's no distinction. So when we hear about hospitalizations, over or under dosing, or potential risks of toxins, there's no distinction. And this plays into the pharma narrative of sort of castigating anything that is not branded as universally the same. And there's not. There's a spectrum, because at the one end of the spectrum, you have essential copies made in times of shortages by 503Bs, which we are advocating should be also allowed to compound when drugs are exorbitantly overpriced, right? That's sort of what we talked about with our interview with Mr. Cook from the CEO of Noom, who has a great proposal, I believe a modest proposal. We brought this up multiple times on Capitol Hill this past week. So you have 503Bs over here, and all the way over here, you have the research grade peptides, which operate entirely outside of the regulatory system. People can go on the internet without a prescription, buy these peptides. They ship over on a cargo container from China or from India, and there's just no telling where the origin is, and there's no regulation at all. So not to distinguish between these does a huge disservice, and I would dare say it renders this information at a minimum, very difficult for patients to actually make any informed decision off of. You already have the issue of it being 700 reports of 80,000 reports. And we know last year alone, there were 80 million doses of semaglutide alone made by legit compounding pharmacies in the US. We know that there were around 30 million tirzepatide compound prescriptions made by compounding pharmacies last year. This is data that we've gotten from the Outsourcing Facilities Association, who represents these pharmacies in the courts in Texas, in terms of the lawsuit they've brought against the FDA regarding the shortages. So you're talking about 110 million prescriptions last year alone in the legitimate compounded, and you're talking about 80,000. This isn't even that 110 million doesn't even count branded. You're talking about 80,000 GLP-1 FAERS reports on hundreds of millions of doses of these medications last year. So to pull out 700 FAERS reports is such at the risk of sounding brash, an insignificant number. But again, this data is already being weaponized. And so without clear sourcing breakdowns in this final data, the study leaves patients just confused about what risk is really there. And I think isn't helpful at all, to be totally honest with you. I just don't find it helpful. And so that's sort of my take on what's going on with that medication. Now, or with the GLP-1 study done to basically pit compound safety against branded name safety. I just don't know that there's anything, at least as patients, from my own personal point of view, that we can derive from that. Now, this sort of plays into this whole prevailing idea with some in the obesity space that, refer to some of the telehealth companies that are offering compounded medications or anti-obesity medications as pill mills. Now I reject this whole thing out of hand. There's some bad actors out there for sure. But when you have telehealth companies like Ro and Hims and Weight Watchers they are scaling, leveraging technology to meet a problem that some of these loud voices in the obesity community are just snubbing their noses at, saying, well, we know how obesity treatment should be done, and they're not doing it correctly. Well, the problem is, even if we filled your offices or your virtual offices with all the patients from Ro and Hims and Weight Watchers and Noom, you'd never be able to handle it. And in order to handle it, you would have to do what? Scale technology. So let's just take a step back and acknowledge that these large telehealth companies are creating platforms and leveraging technology to meet a problem that you, in all of your high and mighty opinions, will never be able to meet by yourself. Right? So partner with, advocate with, and have a voice in how that should be shaped. But in the meantime, we know that there are treatments out there that can help to reverse some of the trajectory of obesity in this country and all of the trickle down sort of cascading comorbidities associated with obesity. We've got to leverage technology. And so it's been an interesting thing to see this whole idea of pill mills, as if any company that is leveraging technology to put medicine or treatment in the hands of patients and to actually meaningfully address this massive problem, 100 million people in the United States alone. It's just ridiculous. I just find the whole thing ridiculous. I think a lot of it is a lot of that sentiment. It comes from good places and it comes from honest places, but it's lacking a acknowledgement of the scope and magnitude of the problem and of technology's ability to address that. So is it perfect? No, but I think it will get better as time goes on, as technology is leveraged to its best ability and as medicine gets better and better. So my little 10 cents on that today. There is a ton that we will be getting to later on in this week. In terms of news that is popping up in obesity medicine, I can't wait to cover it with you all. We got some great interviews lined up for the channel this week and for the podcast. Can't wait to do it. Thank you for being with me. Thank you for helping to give me such a wonderful experience in Washington, D.C. last week. Thank you for all who followed along. And if you could say a special prayer for the Knapp household, we have my son Cooper, who has a very aggressive form of pneumonia right now that he is dealing with, and we are just praying that this new treatment that he's gotten over the last 24 hours really helps him turn a corner. The poor little guy has been so sick, so your prayers are coveted. And drop a happy birthday to Mrs. OTP in the comments, who had her birthday yesterday. She is the light of my life. She's the reason that I do this. She's the wind in my sail, and there is no OTP without Mrs. OTP. So give her some love in the comments today. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for being the best part of what we do at On the Pen. I couldn't, wouldn't, and shouldn't do it without you. I'd like to thank our sponsors, Ro, who sponsor this podcast each and every week. If you're looking to get branded medication because of the scarcity of the compounds, or just the frustration of chasing it down or switching providers every month, it may be time to take a look at Ro, because Ro has a great program called the Ro Body Program, and they're helping hundreds of people within the OTP community get their prior authorizations approved for branded medications. And so it's like $25 a month beats everything, right? So if you can go to Ro, it's $45 for the first month. You can sign up at ro.co/OTP. And you can learn about all these medications there. They'll be prescribed when medically appropriate. They'll connect you with a doctor. They're leveraging technology to do things and connect patients to the care that they deserve, right? Learn about the medications there, learn about potential side effects, ro.co/OTP. But it's a great time to take a look at getting approved for branded medications. And there's nobody better than Ro. So many people in the community are benefiting from that. But thank you for being here. We'll catch you on the next one. I really, really appreciate y'all. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to spend some time with you today.